Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into an absolute epic saga. Really, it's a story about a precious natural resource that was standing right on the brink of total annihilation, and the incredible, highly unlikely turnaround that transformed a looming disaster into a massive global success story. We're talking about the dramatic fall and the magnificent rise of Nepal's forests. This isn't just some straightforward story about planting a few extra trees. It's a deep dive into human nature, governance, and a truly radical idea that completely flipped the script on environmental conservation. At its core, this is a narrative about what actually happens when a nation decides to reverse severe deforestation, not by sending in more armed guards or building bigger fences, but by returning power to the very people who live right there among the trees. To really grasp the scale of this victory, we're going to travel through four distinct eras. We'll start in the dark days of the feudal era, prior to the 1950s, move through decades of, quite frankly, disastrous state control between 1950 and 1978, witness the emergence of community power up to 1990, and finally arrive at the global success model we see today. Let's start at the beginning. Chapter 1. The Era of Exploitation, pre-1950s. So, back under the Rana regime, forests were managed using what was called the Jimadari or Raikar system. Now, under this strictly feudal mindset, forests were viewed as either state property or just a complete free-for-all. They were absolutely not seen as a community resource to be nurtured. To the rulers, the forest was, it was basically just a giant, unending warehouse of free materials waiting to be taken. And because they viewed it like an unending warehouse, the greed was just immense. The Rana rulers extracted massive amounts of resources with exactly zero scientific management. We're talking relentless extraction for everyday fuelwood and massive, sweeping timber harvests just to construct these grand palaces. But the destruction actually went way beyond Nepal's own borders. They were clearing out vast amounts of timber, especially down in the Terai region, simply to export it to India to be used as railway sleepers. It was literally a massive, unchecked drain on the entire ecosystem. But the plot twists in 1951 when the Rana regime finally falls. That brings us to Chapter 2, the nationalization tragedy, spanning 1950 to 1960. The new central government looks around at all this rapid deforestation and asks themselves a pretty dangerous question. How do we fix this? Their grand answer? Centralization. They firmly believed that if the government just swooped in and took strict, overarching control of absolutely everything, they could protect it. So, in 1957, the government passed the Nationalization of Forest Act. The goal was to protect these forests by bringing them entirely under central control. But the reality? It was a spectacular backfire. By stripping away local ownership, they inadvertently triggered what we call an open access tragedy. The locals quickly realized, hey, the forest isn't ours anymore, so the incentive to protect it completely vanished, and the destruction actually accelerated. Which leads right into Chapter 3, State Control Fails, from 1960 to 1978. The state desperately tries to tighten its grip and fails. Instead of taking a step back and reconsidering, the government completely doubled down with the Forest Act of 1961. They bulked up the Department of Forests, carved the land into strict administrative units, and rolled out even more rules. But crucially, they locked in strict government control with practically zero local participation. They essentially tried to lock the people out of their own backyards. And here is the crucial point for our story. Exclusion became the real villain here. See, when you exclude the community from managing the very resources they rely on to survive, they don't just disappear, they go underground. The direct result of that 1961 Forest Act was a massive surge in illegal logging. Forest degradation continued completely unchecked because the government simply couldn't police every single inch of the woods without the help of the people who actually lived there.
Now for the turning point. Chapter 4, The Community Steps In, covering 1978 to 1990.
Right around 1978, the armor of state control finally starts to crack. The government introduced the Panchayat Forest Rules, along with the Panchayat Protected Forest Rules. Now, while this handed control over to the Panchayat system, so actually it wasn't true community forestry just yet, it was monumental. Why? Because it was the very first formal recognition of local participation. Plus, international donors like the World Bank and the FAO started throwing their weight and support behind these projects. The foundation for a true revolution was officially laid down. And that brings us to the climax of our story, Nepal's global success story. from 1990 to 2000. The real catalyst here was the restoration of democracy in 1990. That led directly to the landmark Forest Acts of 1993 and 1995. In a magic bullet, power was officially handed over to community forest user groups, or CFUGs for short. This radically strong participatory system didn't just wag a finger and tell people to protect trees. It actually gave them real, local decision-making power over both the conservation efforts and their own livelihoods. And the results? Honestly, they were nothing short of miraculous. By finally trusting the people, that open access tragedy was completely reversed. The forests began to heal, to grow, and to thrive. In just a few short years, Nepal went from being this grim cautionary tale of environmental degradation to the undisputed global model of community forestry. Let's bring this into the present day. Chapter 5, The Modern Climate Future, from 2000 to the present. Because they built this bedrock of community trust, Nepal is now at the absolute cutting edge. They aren't just surviving anymore, they're strategizing. Using sustainable forest management and REDD+ programs, these communities are actively capturing carbon to fight global climate change. Gone are the days of reckless extraction. Today, locals are using advanced GIS technology and comprehensive national strategies to actually expand protected areas. It's an absolutely stunning collaboration. We've traveled from a feudal system stripping the land bare for palaces and railways, through a pretty disastrous period of government overreach, to this modern triumph of local empowerment. Nepal proved that the absolute best way to protect nature isn't to build a giant wall around it to keep people out, but to give the people a real stake in keeping it alive. It leaves us with a profound question as we look at environmental crises around the world today. If Nepal can save its forests by trusting its people, who else can? Think about that for a bit. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.